before music had trophies, before stages were filled with cameras and bright lights, before names were read from envelopes, music simply lived. It lived in rooms, not arenas, in hands, not headlines, in moments, not ceremonies. There was a time when music ended as soon as the last note faded. No recordings to replay it, no charts to measure it, no awards to recognize it, only memory. In the evening, a family might gather around a piano. A lamp would glow softly on a wooden table. Chairs would be pulled close, not in rows, but in a circle. Someone would begin to play, not perfectly, not for an audience, just for those who were there. Music filled the room, the way warmth from a fire fills the air, gently, without announcement. When the piece ended, there was no applause beyond a smile, perhaps a quiet word of thanks. The music had done its work simply by existing in that moment. Outside the home, music lived in other quiet ways. A violinist might play in a small hall where candles flickered against the walls. A singer's voice might rise inside a church, echoing into wooden beams and fading into stone. These performances were not recorded. They traveled only as far as sound could travel, and when they were over, they remained only in the memory of those who heard them. This gave music a different kind of value. It was fleeting. To hear a song meant to be present at the right time, in the right place. You could not rewind it. You could not carry it home, except in your mind. People did not ask whether a performance was award-winning. They asked whether it moved them, comforted them, or stayed with them after the sound had gone. Musicians were known locally, not globally. A talented pianist might be admired in one town and completely unknown in the next. A singer's voice might be loved by hundreds, but never heard beyond a few streets. Fame, in the modern sense, did not yet exist for most performers. Recognition was personal, not institutional. Someone might say, "She plays beautifully," or "He has a voice that makes the room quiet." These were the awards of the time, simple words carried between neighbors. Music was part of daily life, rather than something set apart. People sang while working. They hummed while walking. They played instruments in the evening not to perform, but to unwind. Songs were shared face to face. A melody learned from a friend might be played years later for another friend, traveling slowly through generations without ever being written down. In this world, there was no need for ceremonies to honor music, because music was not a product separate from life. It was woven into life itself. Festivals, gatherings, and celebrations all included music, but they were not built around it. Music accompanied the moment rather than standing at its center. Even professional musicians experienced a quieter form of recognition. They might travel from town to town, performing in halls lit by oil lamps. If people enjoyed the performance, they returned the next night. If not, the musician moved on. There were no plaques, no statues, no titles, only the steady rhythm of playing and listening. When early recording technologies appeared, they changed how music traveled, but slowly. At first, recordings were fragile and rare. They captured only a narrow slice of sound, like a faint shadow of a performance. Still, the idea that music could be stored and replayed was new and astonishing. For the first time, a voice could be heard again after the singer had gone home. But even then, the focus remained on the music itself, not on ranking or rewarding it. People gathered around early gramophones, not to debate winners and losers, but to experience the wonder of hearing sound preserved. music was still something shared, not competed over. There were no best songs of the year, no countdowns, no ceremonies, just the quiet miracle of sound traveling farther than before. In those early decades of recording, musicians were appreciated for the simple fact that they had captured something beautiful on a disc. The recognition was personal. A listener might say, "I love this record," and play it again. That was enough. Gradually, as recording improved and distribution widened, music began to reach beyond local communities. Voices crossed oceans. Orchestras were heard in places they had never visited. With this growth came a new awareness. Music was no longer just an experience. It was becoming an industry. Records were sold, studios grew. Songs traveled not just by memory, but by shipment and broadcast. And still, for a time, there were no formal awards. People spoke about great singers and composers, but there was no official way to say, "This recording changed something," or "This performance shaped the sound of its time." The appreciation remained scattered, informal, spoken from one listener to another. As radios entered homes, music found yet another quiet path into daily life. In the evenings, families gathered around a glowing dial, listening to orchestras, singers, and bands broadcast from distant cities. These broadcasts created shared musical moments across wide distances. Thousands might hear the same song at the same time, each in their own quiet room. But still, the music passed through life without ceremony. No one paused the broadcast to announce a winner. No envelope was opened. The song played, filled the air, and faded into the night. Music's power remained in its ability to connect people in the moment, to soothe, to inspire, to accompany. It did not need trophies to exist. Yet, as the world of recorded music grew larger, something else began to grow alongside it, a quiet desire to acknowledge the people behind the sound. Engineers who shaped the recordings, songwriters who crafted melodies, performers who brought emotion into microphones instead of halls. The work of making music was becoming more complex, more collaborative. And in this new landscape, appreciation sometimes felt too small when spoken only between individuals. A listener could love a song. A critic could praise an album. But there was not yet a shared moment when the industry itself paused to say, "This mattered." So slowly and gently, the idea of honoring recorded music began to form. Not as spectacle, not as competition, but as recognition. A way of saying thank you to the voices, hands, and minds that filled the world with sound. Before that idea took shape, though, music lived for centuries without formal awards. It survived on memory, repetition, and the quiet gratitude of listeners. A lullaby sung to a child did not need a trophy. A hymn echoing in a church did not need a ceremony. Music's reward was the feeling it left behind. And as we rest for a moment in that earlier world, we can sense how different it was. A world where songs drifted through evenings and disappeared into memory. Where applause, when it came, was enough. Where music was not measured against other music, but simply welcomed into the air. From this quiet beginning, where sound lived without spotlight or stage, the path slowly led toward something new. A gentle wish not to rank music, but to honor it. As the years moved gently forward, music began to travel in new ways. Not only through concert halls and living rooms, but through records, radios, and spinning discs that carried voices far beyond the rooms where they were first sung. By the middle of the 20th century, recorded music had quietly become part of daily life. Songs played in kitchens while supper was prepared. Soft melodies drifted from radios in the evening. Records turned slowly on wooden players, filling homes with sound from distant cities. The world of music was growing, not louder, but wider. Behind each recording was a small world of its own. A singer standing before a microphone. A musician adjusting an instrument under warm studio lights. An engineer turning dials with careful hands, shaping the sound so it would travel clearly into homes far away. These people were not always visible to the listener. Their names were printed in small letters on record sleeves, often overlooked. But their work mattered deeply. They were building the sound of a new era, one quiet session at a time. As recordings became more common, the music industry itself began to take shape. Studios opened in cities across the country. Record labels grew. Producers, engineers, and arrangers formed a network of creative work that stretched behind the scenes of every song. Music was no longer only a live event. It had become something crafted, preserved, and shared again and again. With this change came a gentle question that lingered in the minds of many within the industry. How could the art of recorded music be honored? Film had its awards. Television was beginning to recognize its own creators. But music, especially recorded music, had no shared moment of recognition. No evening when those who worked in studios could gather, reflect, and celebrate the craft they loved. This question did not arise from a desire for glamour. It came from a quieter place, from a wish to respect the artistry, skill, and care that went into each recording. In the 1950s, a group of music professionals began to talk about this idea. They were producers, engineers, executives, and musicians. People who spent their days in studios, listening closely, adjusting sounds, and shaping the recordings that filled the airwaves. They understood how much effort lay behind a single song, how many hands had helped bring it into the world, and they felt that this work, often unseen, deserved acknowledgement. Conversations began slowly. Meetings were held in offices and conference rooms, not under bright lights, but around tables where coffee cups cooled and papers were passed from hand to hand. The idea was not to create competition. It was to create recognition, a way for the music community to pause once a year and say, "These recordings mattered. These people shaped the sound of our time." From these discussions, an organization began to form. It would be made up of music professionals, people who understood the craft from the inside. They would listen, evaluate, and honor recorded music not based on sales alone, but on artistic and technical merit. This organization became known as the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, a long name, often shortened in conversation, but one that reflected a broad purpose. It was not only about performers, it included engineers, producers, songwriters, arrangers, everyone involved in bringing recorded music to life. The Academy's goal was simple and thoughtful: to celebrate the art of recording, to encourage high standards in music production, to recognize those whose work might otherwise remain in the background. In these early days, the Academy was small. It did not have a grand stage or a global audience. It was a community of professionals connected by a shared love of sound. Members gathered to discuss music, to share knowledge, and to build a sense of unity in an industry that was growing quickly. There was a feeling that music, now traveling farther than ever through records and radio waves, needed caretakers, people who would protect its artistic value even as it became more commercial. The Academy hoped to be that steady presence, a place where music was listened to carefully, respectfully, without hurry. Out of this quiet beginning grew the idea of an annual award, not a spectacle, but a ceremony of appreciation, a moment to gather and recognize recordings that had stood out for their creativity, skill, and emotional impact. The award would not belong to one genre or style. It would reflect the wide range of music being recorded: classical, jazz, pop, and more. This inclusive approach was important. The Academy wanted to honor music as a whole, not divide it. And so, in meeting rooms and offices, plans slowly took shape. Committees formed, categories were discussed, ballots were imagined. All of it happening quietly, thoughtfully, with the sense that something new was being created. Not a show, but a tradition. At the heart of it was a simple belief that recorded music, though intangible, deserved a moment of tangible recognition. A small object, a gathering of peers, a shared pause in the ongoing flow of songs. The Recording Academy was not built overnight. It grew from conversations, from shared meals, from evenings spent listening to records and talking about what made them special. It grew from the understanding that music, though fleeting in sound, could be lasting in meaning, and those who shaped it deserved to be seen, even if only once a year, under soft lights in a quiet room. By the end of the decade, the foundation had been laid. An organization existed whose purpose was to care for recorded music, to encourage excellence, and to create a moment each year when the community could come together. Not to compete loudly, but to acknowledge gently. From this careful beginning, the first awards would soon follow. But before the ceremony, before the envelopes and the applause, there was simply a group of people who loved music deeply and believed it was worth honoring, not with noise, but with respect. When people first see the Grammy Award, they notice its shape. Not a star, not a crown, not a musical note floating in the air. Instead, a small golden gramophone, a horn opening outward, a bass resting quietly below, a design that feels older than the modern stage where it is presented. To understand why the award looks this way, we have to return to a time when music was not invisible, not digital, not carried through unseen signals, a time when music had weight, when sound left a physical trace, before microphones became small and hidden, before speakers were built into walls. Music was captured through a mechanical process that required patience and precision. At the center of that process stood the gramophone. The gramophone was not the first device to record sound, but it became one of the most recognizable. It worked through a simple yet delicate principle. Sound waves traveled through the air and entered a large horn. Those waves moved a thin diaphragm, which in turn moved a tiny needle. The needle carved patterns into a rotating surface, a disc. These patterns were not random. They were the physical shape of sound itself. Later, when the disc was played, another needle traced those grooves. The vibrations returned, moving air once more. Sound captured and released again. The gramophone did not store music as numbers or signals. It stored music as motion, as lines and curves etched into material. You could hold the music in your hands. You could see it if you looked closely enough. This connection between sound and physical form gave early recordings a special presence. Music was no longer only something you heard in a room. It was something you could place on a shelf, lift carefully, and set spinning. The gramophone became a symbol of this new era, an era where music could travel without the performer, where voices could be heard long after they were first spoken or sung. Homes that owned a gramophone treated it with care. It was often placed in a central spot, not hidden away. Families gathered around it in the evening. A record would be selected, placed on the turntable, and the needle lowered gently. There would be a moment of soft crackle. Then music would fill the room. The horn of the gramophone, wide and open, seemed almost like an ear, listening as much as speaking. It represented a meeting point between human creativity and mechanical invention, a place where art and technology worked together quietly. When the Recording Academy later searched for a symbol for its award, it did not choose something modern. It chose something rooted in the beginning of recorded music. The gramophone was not just a machine. It was the doorway through which music first entered the recorded world. By shaping the award like a gramophone, the Academy honored that history. It acknowledged that every modern recording, no matter how advanced the technology, had its roots in those early mechanical devices. The shape also carried a sense of calm and tradition. Unlike a microphone, which suggests performance, or a spotlight, which suggests attention, the gramophone suggests listening. It invites sound to enter, to be heard, to be appreciated. It does not shout, it waits. The design of the trophy reflects this quiet role. The horn curves gently outward. The base is steady and simple. The entire form feels balanced, grounded. It is not a symbol of competition, but of preservation. A reminder that music, once captured, can live beyond the moment. There is also something deeply human about the gramophone's form. It resembles a flower opening or a shell shaped by time. Its curves are soft rather than sharp. It feels less like a machine and more like an object that belongs in a room filled with lamplight and evening stillness. By the time the Grammy Awards were created, the gramophone itself had already become an antique. Newer devices had replaced it. Records were played through speakers. Technology had grown smaller, more hidden. But the gramophone remained in memory as the beginning, as the first widely recognized shape of recorded sound. The Academy chose it not because it was modern, but because it was meaningful. It connected the present to the past. It reminded musicians and listeners alike that every recording is part of a longer story, a story that began with mechanical horns and spinning discs. The Grammy trophy does not move. It does not play music. It is a still object, yet its shape suggests motion. The turning of a record, the flow of sound outward. It captures the moment when music leaves silence and enters the air. When an artist holds the trophy, they hold not just a symbol of recognition, but a symbol of continuity. A link to the first days when music could be stored and shared beyond the walls of a single room. The gramophone shape also reflects something gentle about recorded music itself. Unlike live performance, which disappears once the last note fades, recorded music lingers. It can be revisited. It can be heard again in quiet moments. The gramophone, with its patient horn and steady bass, embodies that idea, a quiet companion for sound. Over time, the Grammy trophy became one of the most recognizable shapes in music, but its meaning remains rooted in that early device. A reminder that music's journey into permanence began with a simple mechanical process, a needle, a groove, a turning disc, and a horn that opened like a flower, allowing sound to bloom into the room. By honoring the gramophone in its design, the award honors the act of listening, the care of recording, the preservation of sound. It says, without words, that music matters not only in the moment of performance, but in the quiet after, when it is remembered, replayed, and allowed to live again. And so the small golden gramophone stands year after year on stages and shelves, a quiet symbol of where recorded music began, a shape that carries the past forward, a reminder that before the lights, before the applause, before the ceremony, there was simply a device that listened carefully and gave sound a place to stay. By the late 1950s, the idea had taken shape. An organization now existed that cared deeply about recorded music. Its members had spent years listening, discussing, and building a quiet sense of community around the craft of sound. All that remained was a simple question. How do you honor music? Gently. Not with spectacle, not with bright lights and roaring crowds, but with something closer to the spirit of the recordings themselves, careful, respectful, and calm. And so, in 1959, the first Grammy Awards were held. The evening did not resemble the ceremonies we know today. There was no massive arena, no elaborate stage design, no long broadcast watched around the world. Instead, the first Grammy ceremonies took place in two cities, Los Angeles and New York, in modest banquet settings. Guests sat at round tables. Cloth napkins rested beside plates. Glasses caught the soft light of chandeliers overhead. It felt more like a formal dinner than a global event. The people in the room were not celebrities in the modern sense. They were musicians, producers, engineers, and industry professionals, people who spent their days in studios rather than on red carpets. Conversations were quiet and familiar. Colleagues greeted one another, not as rivals, but as peers. There was a sense that everyone present shared something in common, a deep respect for music and the work that went into capturing it. When the awards were presented, the atmosphere remained gentle. Names were read. Applause followed, warm but not overwhelming. Winners walked a short distance to receive a small trophy shaped like a gramophone. There were no long speeches, no dramatic music swelling in the background, just simple words of thanks. Some awards were presented in small groups, without lengthy introductions. The evening moved steadily, without hurry. At the time, there were only a few dozen categories. They reflected the musical landscape of the era: classical, jazz, traditional pop. Rock and roll, still young and not yet fully embraced by every part of the industry, had only a small presence. The focus was not on trends, but on craftsmanship. Recordings that demonstrated care, skill, and artistic integrity were honored. In many ways, the ceremony felt like a gathering of people who already knew one another's work. They had listened to these recordings in studios and offices. They had discussed them in meetings. Now they met in person to mark the moment together. There were no flashing cameras from every angle. Photographs were taken, but they were simple. Black and white images capturing smiles, handshakes, and quiet pride. If you stepped into the room that evening, you might not have immediately realized you were witnessing the beginning of a major cultural tradition. It felt small, intentional, personal, and that was exactly how it was meant to be. The Recording Academy had not set out to create a grand show. Its goal was to create a moment of recognition within the music community itself. A pause in the year to say, This recording mattered. This work was heard. For many of the winners, the award came as a quiet surprise. They had not campaigned for it. They had simply made music, worked carefully, and released recordings into the world. To be recognized by their peers carried a different kind of meaning. It was not about popularity alone. It was about respect from others who understood the craft. The venues themselves added to the calm feeling of the evening. Hotel ballrooms with polished floors and soft lighting. Small stages with simple backdrops. Microphones on stands, not surrounded by screens. When someone spoke, the room listened. Conversations hushed. Glasses paused in midair. It was not a night of spectacle, but of attention. Music, in its recorded form, had brought these people together, and they honored it in a way that mirrored its nature, subtle, lasting, and shared. Some attendees likely wondered whether this ceremony would continue in the years to come. Would it remain small? Would it grow? No one could fully know. But that uncertainty added to the quiet charm of the evening. It was a beginning without grand expectations. Just a simple gathering, built on the belief that recorded music deserved a moment of thanks. When the ceremony ended, people did not rush out into crowds or flashing lights. They returned to conversations, to lingering at tables, to finishing meals. Some may have carried their small gramophone trophies back to hotel rooms, placing them carefully on dressers beside lamps. Others returned home without an award, but with a sense of having been part of something meaningful. The night ended the way it began, calmly. The lights dimmed, chairs were pushed back, the room slowly emptied. Outside, the city carried on with its usual rhythm. Most people were unaware that a new tradition had just begun. There were no headlines the next morning declaring a major cultural moment. But within the music community, a quiet shift had taken place. There was now a shared ritual, a yearly evening when the industry would come together, not to compete loudly, but to acknowledge gently. In the years that followed, the ceremony would grow. More categories, larger audiences, bigger venues. But that first night remained different. It held a simplicity that reflected the original spirit of the Recording Academy. A belief that music, captured and preserved, deserved to be honored not with noise, but with gratitude. And as the first Grammy ceremony faded into memory, it left behind something soft and steady, a tradition rooted in respect. A small golden gramophone passed from hand to hand, a reminder that behind every recording lies quiet work, careful listening, and the human desire to say thank you for the gift of sound. After the first Grammy ceremony, something quiet continued to unfold. The awards did not suddenly transform into a grand spectacle. They remained, for a time, a gentle tradition, a yearly pause to acknowledge the craft of recorded music. But outside those ceremony rooms, the world of music was changing. New sounds were emerging. New instruments found their way into studios. New voices rose from cities, towns, and distant corners of the world. Music never stands still. It moves with people, with technology, with culture. And as music shifted, the Grammy categories began to shift with it. Not all at once, but gradually, like seasons changing one by one. In the earliest years, the categories were few and broad. They reflected a musical landscape where classical, jazz, and traditional popular music held strong places. These were the styles most recognized by recording institutions at the time. But music was expanding beyond those familiar borders. Guitars grew louder, Drums took on new rhythms. Voices carried different stories. Young listeners filled rooms with new kinds of sound, records spinning late into the night. The Recording Academy, attentive and careful, began to notice. It did not rush to redefine everything. Instead, it listened. Members heard the changing patterns in studios and on records. They recognized that new styles were not passing trends, but meaningful expressions of their time. So gently, new categories were added, not to replace the old ones, but to make room. Rock music, once seen as youthful and temporary, found a place among the awards. Later, other styles followed: folk, rhythm and blues, country. Each edition reflected a simple idea. Music is always growing, and recognition must grow with it. The process of adding categories was never about chasing popularity alone. It was about understanding how music was being made, recorded, and heard. When a new style developed its own techniques, its own traditions, and its own community of artists and listeners, the Academy looked for ways to honor it properly. This careful expansion meant that the awards slowly became a mirror of the wider musical world. Where once there had been only a few broad sections, now there were spaces for different textures of sound, songs built around storytelling, instrumental pieces that explored atmosphere rather than melody, voices shaped by regional traditions. Behind each new category was a recognition that music is not one single path, but many winding roads. The growth of categories also reflected the growing complexity of recording itself. Early recordings captured performances in simple, direct ways. But as technology advanced, the process became more layered. Engineers experimented with new methods. Producers shaped arrangements. Studios became creative spaces where sound could be sculpted. As this happened, it became clear that more than performers deserved recognition. Songwriters, arrangers, producers, and engineers played vital roles in shaping recordings. New categories were created to acknowledge these contributions. The awards quietly broadened their focus, honoring not only the voice at the microphone, but the many hands behind the sound. Each edition came after discussion and listening. Committees considered how music was evolving. They asked where recognition might be missing. They moved slowly, aware that categories shape how music is valued. In this way, the growth of categories became part of the Academy's larger mission: to respect the diversity of recorded sound without losing the calm spirit of thoughtful appreciation. Over time, music from different cultures and languages also found a place within the awards. As recordings traveled more easily across borders, listeners discovered new rhythms and traditions. The Grammy categories expanded to reflect this wider world of sound. This did not happen in a single year. It unfolded gradually as understanding deepened and the music community grew more connected. Each new category was like opening a window. It allowed different voices to be heard, different traditions to be recognized. And yet, even as the list of categories grew, the heart of the ceremony remained the same: a quiet moment of acknowledgement. A small statue passed from one set of hands to another. Applause that was warm rather than overwhelming. The growth of categories did not mean a loss of calm. It meant a broader embrace, a recognition that music cannot be confined to a single shape or style, that the world's soundscape is too rich to fit into only a few labels. As decades passed, some categories shifted, merged, or changed names. This too reflected the natural movement of music. Genres blended, Artists crossed boundaries. What once seemed separate became connected. The Academy adapted gently, refining its structure while trying to remain true to its purpose. Behind these changes was an ongoing effort to balance tradition and evolution, to honor the past while making room for the present. The growing list of categories was not just a sign of expansion. It was a record of how music itself had changed. Each category marked a moment when a style of sound had become strong enough, lasting enough, to be recognized as part of the larger story of recorded music. In this way, the Grammy Awards became not only a celebration, but a kind of archive, a reflection of the shifting landscape of music over time. From orchestras and jazz ensembles to bands built around electric guitars, from solo singers to collaborative productions that blended many influences, all of it slowly found a place. And through it all, the spirit of the ceremony remained rooted in listening. Not loud debate, but careful attention. Not rapid change, but steady adjustment. As the categories grew, the world of music felt larger, yet also more connected. Different styles stood side by side, each acknowledged for its own contribution. The awards became a quiet map of musical history, showing where new paths had formed and where traditions continued to flow. And as we drift forward from this chapter, we carry with us the sense that growth does not have to be sudden or noisy. It can happen slowly, thoughtfully, in response to the rhythms of life. Just as music evolves from one generation to the next, the Grammy categories evolve too, gently expanding, one careful step at a time. Long before envelopes are opened, long before names are spoken into microphones, there is a much quieter process. It does not take place on a stage. There are no spotlights, no applause. Instead, it happens in small rooms, at desks, in studios, and living rooms, wherever music can be heard with care. The process of choosing Grammy winners begins with listening. Not casual listening, not background sound while doing something else, but a focused, intentional listening. Members of the Recording Academy, musicians, producers, engineers, and other music professionals take part in this process. They are people who work with sound every day. They understand how a recording is built, how a voice sits in a mix, how an arrangement shapes a song's feeling. When the time comes to consider recordings from the past year, these members receive access to eligible entries, albums, songs, performances, each one carrying months or years of work from the people who made them. There is no rush in this stage. Members listen over days and weeks. Some might play a record late at night after a long day in the studio. Others might sit with headphones on a quiet afternoon, letting the music fill their attention. They are not asked to choose the most famous song or the one they heard most often on the radio. They are asked to listen for quality, creativity, and craft. In this way, the process feels less like judging and more like careful appreciation. A member might replay a track to notice how the instruments blend together. They might pay attention to how a vocal performance carries emotion through small changes in tone. They might notice the clarity of a recording, the way space and silence are used. Each listener brings their own experience, but they share a common respect for the art of making music. After this period of listening, members cast their votes. They do not vote in every category. Instead, they vote in fields where they have knowledge and understanding. A classical musician might focus on classical recordings. A producer who works in pop might listen closely to pop entries. This helps ensure that decisions are made by people who know the language of that style. The voting itself is private. There is no public discussion, no debate under bright lights. Each vote is a quiet decision, made by someone alone with the music. Once votes are cast, they are collected and counted through a careful, confidential process. Independent accounting firms oversee the counting to ensure fairness and accuracy. This stage is handled with great attention to detail. Ballots are reviewed, totals are checked, and the results are sealed. No one involved in the ceremony knows the winners until the envelopes are opened on stage. This secrecy adds to the sense of anticipation later, but behind the scenes, it simply reflects the care taken to keep the process fair. For those who participate in voting, the experience can feel reflective. It is a chance to look back on a year of music, to revisit recordings that moved them, surprised them, or stayed in their memory. It is not about eliminating others, but about recognizing what stood out in a sea of sound. Sometimes a member might feel torn between two recordings they admire equally. They may listen again, not to decide quickly, but to understand more deeply what each piece offers. In this way, the act of voting becomes another form of listening, patient and thoughtful. It is also important to remember that the Grammy voting process involves thousands of professionals. Each one listens from their own perspective. When votes come together, they form a collective picture rather than a single opinion. This collective nature means that no one voice dominates. Instead, the winners reflect a broad sense of respect across the music community. Behind all of this is a belief that music deserves to be heard carefully, not only when it is new, but when it is being considered with intention. The voting process invites industry professionals to slow down and pay attention, to step out of the rush of daily work and simply listen. By the time the final nominees are announced, much of this quiet listening has already taken place. But even then, the process continues. Members listen again before casting final votes. Music plays softly in homes and studios across the world, each listener forming a quiet connection with the recordings before them. No one sees these moments. There are no cameras in the rooms where decisions are made. Yet these unseen hours of listening are at the heart of the awards. They are the calm center behind the bright ceremony. When the envelopes are finally opened on stage, the moment lasts only seconds. A name is read, applause rises, a trophy changes hands. But that moment rests on a long chain of quiet listening that came before it, a chain of people sitting still, letting music speak and responding with care. In this way, the Grammy process remains rooted in something simple and gentle, not spectacle, not speed, but attention. Attention to sound, attention to craft, attention to the emotional power of music. And as the year turns and new recordings begin to fill the world again, the process waits patiently to begin once more. Another season of listening, another quiet journey through the sounds that shaped a year, all unfolding far from the stage, in rooms where music is heard not as a performance, but as a shared human experience. Long before the stage lights glow, long before a name is read aloud, there are rooms, not grand halls, not crowded arenas, just quiet rooms where music is heard carefully. These spaces are often small, a desk, a chair, a pair of speakers or headphones. A lamp glows softly in the corner, casting warm light across a table where notes may rest beside a cup of tea or coffee long gone cold. In these rooms, The world outside grows distant. The day's noise fades, and what remains is sound. This is where much of the Grammy journey truly begins. Not on a red carpet, but in listening. Members of the Recording Academy sit in these rooms, alone or nearly alone, giving their full attention to the recordings before them. There is no rush. A song might be played once, then again, not to memorize it, but to feel how it unfolds, the rise and fall of a melody, the breath before a phrase, the way instruments sit beside one another in the air. In these moments, music is not performance, it is presence. A voice enters the room through speakers and seems to hover there, close and personal. A drum beat sets a quiet rhythm, like a second heartbeat. A piano note lingers, fading slowly into silence. The listener leans back, eyes closed perhaps, letting the music fill the space. Sometimes the room is part of a studio, walls lined with soft material that absorbs echoes, control panels resting dark for the moment, their lights dimmed. The listener presses play and lets the recording speak without interruption. Other times, the room is simply a living room or study. A window reflects the darkness outside. A bookshelf stands nearby. The world beyond the glass moves quietly on, unaware that decisions about music are taking shape inside. What happens in these rooms is not dramatic. There are no debates, no raised voices, just listening. Careful, attentive listening. Each person brings their own history of sound. Years spent playing, producing, or recording music. Memories of performances and sessions that shape their ears. But in the quiet room, they set those memories gently aside. They try to hear each recording for what it is, in this moment. Some recordings feel like conversations. Others feel like landscapes. Some carry joy that lifts the room's mood. Others hold a stillness that asks for reflection. The listener notices details that casual ears might miss. A harmony tucked softly beneath a melody, a subtle shift in tempo, the texture of a voice moving from strength to fragility. These details are not loud. They reveal themselves only to patient attention. Time passes gently in these listening sessions. Outside, the sky darkens or brightens. Inside, one song flows into another. There may be pauses, moments to breathe, to write a small note, to sit in silence before beginning again. These pauses are as important as the music itself. They give space for feeling to settle. In these rooms, the awards are not yet about winners. They are about connection. One human being, listening to another's work, trying to understand what it offers, what it expresses, what it leaves behind in the quiet after it ends. No one is watching. There is no audience for this act of listening. Yet it is here, in these unseen hours, that the spirit of the Grammy Awards takes shape. Because recognition begins with attention, and attention begins with stillness. Some nights, the only light in the room is from a single lamp. The rest of the house sleeps. The listener presses play one more time, letting the final notes of a recording drift into the soft air. When the song ends, they sit for a moment longer, hearing the silence that follows. That silence is part of the music's journey. It is where memory begins. Eventually, the listening ends. The headphones are set down. The speakers fall quiet. The room returns to its ordinary stillness. But something has changed. The listener carries the music with them now, even after the sound has faded. These quiet rooms do not appear on television. They do not make headlines, yet they are the calm foundation beneath the ceremony before applause. before speeches, before golden statues are lifted under bright lights, there is simply a person in a quiet room, listening with care. And in that listening, music finds its way from one heart to another, softly, gently, and without noise. By the time the ceremony arrives, by the time the envelopes are opened and names are spoken, the small golden statue is already waiting. It does not move. It does not speak. It simply rests, quiet and still, shaped like a gramophone from another time. To many people, the Grammy trophy is an award, but to those who hold it, and to those who watch from a distance, it is also a symbol of music made real. Music itself cannot be held. It drifts through air, lives in memory, fades into silence. But the Grammy gives shape to something that cannot be touched. It turns sound into a form you can place on a shelf. The gramophone shape connects the present to the beginning of recorded sound. Long before streaming, long before radio filled the airwaves, music had to be captured carefully, etched into grooves, preserved with patience. The trophy remembers that. It is not shaped like a microphone or a speaker. It is shaped like a device that listened, that received sound and held it gently. In that way, the Grammy is not only about performance, it is about preservation. It honors the act of recording, the careful work that allows music to travel beyond a single moment. When an artist receives a Grammy, they are not only recognized for a song or album, they are being linked to a long chain of people who have shaped recorded sound. Engineers, producers, musicians, writers, all part of a quiet tradition of making music that lasts. The trophy's weight is small, but its meaning can feel large, not because it declares someone the best, but because it represents a shared respect. It says, this work was heard. In a world filled with constant sound, being heard with care is something special. The Grammy does not change the music itself. The songs remain the same before and after. But the symbol offers a moment of pause, a chance to step back from the rush of releases and tours and promotion, and simply acknowledge the craft behind the sound. Placed on a shelf, the gramophone statue becomes part of an artist's quiet space. It sits among books, instruments, or photographs. It does not shine on its own. It reflects the light around it. In this way, it becomes part of the room, not separate from it. A reminder of a moment when the music community paused to say, thank you. For some, the Grammy represents years of effort. Late nights in studios, endless revisions, moments of doubt and persistence. The trophy gathers those invisible hours into one small object. It cannot show the work directly, but it stands in for it. Like a bookmark placed at the end of a long chapter, the Grammy is also a symbol of listening. Before the award reaches the stage, it passes through many ears. People who listened carefully, quietly, without applause. Their attention is part of the trophy's meaning. It reminds us that music begins and ends with listening. Even the ceremony itself, for all its lights and performances, centers on that idea. Songs are performed, names are called, but at the heart of it is the simple act of hearing and being heard. The gramophone shape captures this. Its horn opens outward as if ready to receive sound. It suggests openness, attention, care. Over time, the Grammy has come to represent more than a single year's music. It represents continuity, a thread that runs from early recordings to modern ones, from mechanical grooves to digital files. The technology changes, but the desire to capture and share sound remains the same. The trophy holds that history in its shape. For listeners, the Grammy can also be a symbol of discovery. An award might draw attention to music they have not yet heard. It becomes a small guidepost in the vast landscape of sound, not a final answer, but a quiet suggestion. Listen to this. And so the Grammy moves through different lives in different ways. On a stage, it gleams under bright lights. In a home, it sits quietly on a shelf. In memory, it marks a moment when music was honored. Yet its true meaning is not in the metal or the gold color. It lives in what it represents: respect for the art of recording, recognition of shared effort, a pause to listen more closely. Long after the ceremony ends, long after applause fades, the trophy remains, still, silent, waiting in the quiet of a room. And in that stillness, it reminds us of something simple and lasting. Music may drift through time, but the care behind it leaves a mark. A small golden gramophone, shaped like the past, standing gently in the present. A symbol not of noise or fame, but of sound remembered, listened to, and held with respect. The lights have dimmed now. The stage, once bright, rests in shadow. Rows of empty seats stretch quietly into the dark, holding only the memory of sound that filled the air not long ago. Somewhere, a final note still seems to linger, not in the room itself, but in the space inside the listener, the soft echo that music leaves behind when it has finished speaking. Backstage, footsteps have faded, instruments sit in their cases, microphones stand still, no longer waiting for a voice. The evening, which held so many sounds, gently closes like a book whose last page has been turned with care. Outside, night moves calmly across the sky. City lights glow in the distance, steady and patient. Cars pass quietly on faraway streets, unaware that inside a hall, a chapter of music has just come to rest. In another part of the city, in a quiet home, a lamp still burns beside a chair. A record spins slowly on a turntable. The soft crackle before a song begins fills the room like a whisper. The music that follows is not loud. It does not need to be. It simply flows, warm and familiar, carrying the listener somewhere gentle and still. On a nearby shelf, a small golden gramophone catches the lamplight. It does not shine brightly. It glows softly, reflecting the calm of the room. The trophy is no longer part of a ceremony. It is just an object at rest, like a book after reading, like an instrument after playing. Its meaning now lives in memory, in the songs that led to it, in the voices that filled the air, in the quiet hours of listening that came before applause. Music has always been like this. It rises, it moves, it fades, and in its fading, it leaves something behind, not silence, but a different kind of presence, a gentle fullness, the kind that lingers when a beautiful moment has passed. The world outside continues in its steady rhythm. The night grows deeper. Windows reflect the soft glow of lamps. Curtains hang still. Somewhere, someone hums a melody without thinking, carrying a fragment of the evening sound into their own quiet space. In the stillness, music does not disappear. It becomes memory, woven into thought and feeling. It becomes part of the listener, just as it once moved through air. And so we return, gently, to the quiet from which the music first arose. A quiet that is not empty, but full of traces. Traces of voices, of instruments, of shared moments. The stage will light again another night. Songs will rise again, new and familiar. But for now, everything rests. The hall is empty. The record slows to a stop. The lamp glows softly beside a sleeping room. And in this calm ending, music does what it has always done best. It leaves us in stillness, held gently by the memory of sound, as night carries us softly into rest.